ANIMAPHIX streaming experience. We are second part of our beautiful meeting with my friend Pierre Hébert. So we talk a lot about your films. I mean, we could talk much more, but it's enough maybe for the moment. And but one interesting things of your career of artist is how you were like playing live. You said once you wanted to do like a musician, so to
Yes.
be able to improvise, to be on stage, etc. So it started all from a joke from a friend of us,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you can start to say, and this was before your retirement, obviously.
Yes. We had the project with René Lucier, Robert Lepage, and Jean de Rome, which were the three of the musicians of this improvisation scene of Montreal. The project of doing a projection of my films where they would redo new music to the existing films, and in part of this was the idea that they would do the original music of Le Métro, the subway song and dances of Inanimate World. So we were doing that, and I was just like, playing effects from tapes and doing little things to accompany. But I was not doing live animation in that show. It was more a way of distributing my films. And at one point, Jean de Rome told me, "Well, we're taking all the risks. When we come every night, we don't know what we're going to play. We have to invent it, and all your things are already done. It's not fair." Jean would have liked me to do something like psychedelic shows of the 60s, but I wasn't too interested in that kind of effects. I wanted something that would be really frame by frame animation.
It was
And
more thinking about Marquee Club in London in the with Pink Floyd, something
yeah.
like.
So at one point I had the vision of a 16 millimeter projector with a long loop in it, so that there would be enough outside of the projector that it would be possible to take it and draw a few images on the film while it was running. So I thought, well, that may be a way of doing it that would be feasible. And Jean de Rome was preparing a show, what was called Confiture de Gagacu. It was a large orchestra with dance, projections of photographs. And he asked if I would accept to do projects film during that performance. And I suggested I could do live live animation. And he said, yes, that's a good idea. It's very exciting. And I was so afraid of doing it that I wouldn't even try it until about 2 weeks before the show was on. I heard on the radio Jean de Rome in an interview who was explaining that I would be doing this during the performance. And so I became really panicked, and I finally decided that I should try it before doing it in public. So I sort of started this in a very catastrophic way, and it was this series of performance was very frightening. It was like jumping from a window, not knowing which floor you're on, and I thought at that point that would be just a project to do that, and that it would be over. But it continued actually, and
So which year was in the middle of the 80s or at the end of the 80s?
that was yes, was it? No, I was still at the National Film Board, so
Yeah, sure.
it was in the late 70s actually.
Ah,
Uh,
I mean,
it
it
was
was just after Souvenir de Guerre. Was in the
Yeah,
period.
it was after Souvenir de Guerre. It was after Etienne et Sarah. Yeah.
I understand that was like something at that time. There were almost nobody was doing. Not a
they,
lot of people were doing.
well, they were video artists
Yeah,
that were doing things that they will call scratch animation, with a series of sources and some mixers, and it was quite a complicated process, and it didn't involve creating the image in the process. And actually, in the very early 2000, I did work with a video artist. Where we did combine video scratch performance with live scratch animation. So but in terms of performing with animation, I don't know of many people doing that. There were some experimental filmmakers that were doing something similar. Like I think there was this performance where a woman filmmaker was using a sewing machine on a piece of film that was being projected at the same time, and she was doing it until the film was destroyed in the process of passing through the projector and having the sewing machine making holes in the film. So I think there were other things, but there were many other things at that time. And then I got the idea that actually I had a system where my musician friend could call me in the afternoon saying, "We have this gig tonight, do you come?" And it was possible to go and actually start improvising with them. So I thought that was really very
You
exciting.
only have to tune the projector instead of
Yeah,
tuning the guitar.
exactly. And so it did correspond to my idea that I always wanted to be a musician. So in a way, I was behaving like a musician. It was something different than music, but I was behaving in a musician and in close contact with musical events and with musicians.
And
So
so you started with a big ensemble in La Confiture de Gagaku, and then you started suddenly, immediately after, to understand that the best way to play is with one musician only.
yeah, it was because the the situation of those performances was something quite fragile in the sense that there was it was very difficult to conceive of synchronized music and images because when while I was scratching, it was not being projected. It was going to be projected in a variable length of time after I had scratched it. So there was something totally unpredictable. The musician would see the loop coming over and over again, but there would always be new elements in it, and he couldn't know in advance what the new elements were. So I realized that after working, especially after working solo or duet with Bob Ostertag, I realized that the sort of concentration, the mental concentration between the player and myself was something very important in order to increase the possibility that things would connect and some synchronized point would spontaneously be created and all that. And I realized that when there were a group of musicians, they first had to play between themselves. And there was not a lot mental space left to connect to the image. And there certainly was not a mental space to make that kind of concentration between the filmmaker and the musician. Uh, and it was quite before one musician decide to react to the image, before the other musician go along with it, they accept to do it. It took a little while. So there was quite a lot of inertia in terms of changing things in that situation. So I realized that could be better to work with a single player and to create this situation when there was this tightrope, very intense concentration one towards the other. And I thought that was working and that. So from very quickly, when I played with Baba Sirtak, who was alone, I realized that this was the correct way to do it.
But also
So
sometimes with Fred Fritz, you were alone and also
yes, after that, I worked
with
alone with
Robert
Fred
Marcel Lepage.
Marcel,
The three
Robert
musicians
Marcel
you were
Lepage.
working, no?
Hey?
Before the retirement. I mean, Bob Ostertag, Fred Fritz, and Robert Marcel Lepage were the
Yeah,
three musicians you were working more.
yeah, absolutely. And then Bob for all the early years of 2000, it was almost only Bob. And after that, I started to have projects with other musicians like yourself, for example. And yeah, So
So, but with Bob, you really develop a different way. I mean, you left beside a little bit scratching on film and
well,
started another way, no?
there was a first important thing with Bob. You know, when I was doing this process, I was stuck with a loop that was repeating itself every 50 seconds. And I tried to play with that situation by adding a shutter with a bass drum pedal so that I could shut the image at moments. I started to stop projecting and insert pre-animated sections in the loop or remove section, different things I would do in order to change the impression of the ever coming loop. And when I started to work with Bob, since Bob was working with a sampler and making loops out of recorded sounds, and all his work was based on looping of different length, very complex looping, it naturally connected to my loop situation. And with no effort, uh, where the situation where I didn't have the frustration of saying, you know, I'm only working with the loops and those musicians are flowing around everywhere they want. And with Bob, it was absolutely perfect that my process was loop based and it connected in a very strong way. And then at one point, Bob actually at that time he came to work with a sampler, a digital sampler that he had programmed himself with Max MSP. And when I left the National Film Board in the very early 2000, he offered me to create a Max patch that would be similar to his sampler, but that would be adapted to animation. And so that was a big change because uh, it still was loop based, but because it was digital, I could have easily many layers with loops of different length, and it allowed a much more complex situation, and it allowed me to work with objects since I was using a little digital camera in front of a surface. I could show my hands working, drawing, making all sort of things with different substances like ash,
Objects or whatever, yeah.
yeah, all the things that were possible. So I started, you know, drawing, painting on glass, animating objects, things like that. And the only thing I could not do in this situation was scratching on film. So it led me to use all those other ways and develop a much more complex performance, much more complex use of loops, more varied images, colors, everything. But I lost scratching on film. And when I started to scratch again 2 or 3 years later, I realized that I had lost contact with the technique, that I had no physical or mental feeling like I had before to do that. So I thought that I was done forever with scratching on film. And I continued with with the digital setup, doing performances and thinking more and more about more complex looping that would be a type of looping that would be adapted to animation, like overlapping two different loops of different length and let it connect in different way. So and it allowed me to develop a stylistical approach that is becoming very important today. And that was that I used a lot more and more in the places and monument projects, which is
Yeah.
something else that we will
We
talk.
can also talk a little bit about these places and monuments because I think it's very interesting and it become more and more in the last 20 years one of the main production of you. I mean, and
Yes, absolutely.
I think that also maybe it it bring also to the last film you did, the last long film that you just finished. I think came from this process or not.
Oh, it did totally. Yes. Yes, and actually,
We have to talk about this.
the Places and Monument project, actually, it did evolve from the touring I was doing with Bob Ostertag to do performances a bit everywhere in the world. Actually, we basically went through all the different continents in all areas of the world to do that. And what happened, and actually started in Japan, is that when we were part of a festival, you know, our 40, 50 minutes performance was long enough, even sometime a bit too long, and they asked us to reduce it a little bit. But when we were being shown in a situation where we were the only people in the evening, 40 minutes was not quite long enough. So we started to do performances that were done with video shooting and recorded sound that were done in the city where we were performing in the afternoon before the performance. So we would gather material and then we would do a short half-hour performance out of this material. So those shooting were always had to do with specific places in the cities we were. So I was sort of trying to find meaningful places to do that. And from performance to performance, it did develop. And at one point, we were in Rome and we were doing our performance, and we needed this extra section. So I went to Campo dei Fiori, and I shot something with the statue of Giordano Bruno, and that was a performance that I was quite happy with the performance, and I decided to make a film out of this shooting, which is called the statue of Giordano Bruno, and in a way, it was the first Places and Monument.
It was one of number zero. I mean,
Eh?
number zero.
Yeah.
Places and
Although I didn't know I was starting a series, the idea came from there, and there was another film done in Brittany at a place where there's a nuclear waste processing plant near a very spectacular shore with huge falaises, cliffs, and things like. So I did the second film that was also in a specific, trying to capture the spirit or the ghosts that are inhabiting a specific place. So and when I did Places and Monument one, that was from shooting I did in Prague, I sort of realized that I had already started this project with the two previous films. And so it had to do with shooting in different places in the world and connecting something that can be considered a monument that means something that would celebrate some event in the past, or that had to do with the past time, but connecting to daily life in that situation, and to the fact that those monuments that people may even have forgotten what it was about. So there was this tension between current life in the present time and the past. Is it created traces like monuments in the public places, in the public space of ours. So I expected to do those segments in order to sort of have the spirit of those places emerge, the past emerge in connection to the current time, to people doing their daily life. So I started doing that, and I thought that if I do that in a number of places in the world, it would eventually create a picture of the world through very important, very unimportant actions or things by people captured live in those different places. So at the beginning, while I was touring with Bob, when I would run into some places where I thought it had meaning to shoot it, that I could do something with it. Maybe this is how I started to accumulate material. But then it became a project, and I started to think how I was doing that. So there's a whole system that did develop around this project. First, a way of shooting. So it was like, for example, it was a rule that I would apply, that I would never hide myself with the camera, that I would always set up in very visible by the people I was shooting in the middle of a space.
So that the people can interact with you if they want, for example.
So, and also I had this idea of the flaneur. I was like a flaneur. This is how I was choosing the places I was shooting. And when I was there, I was acting like somebody behind a camera that was very uninterested by what was happening in front of him, waiting for who knows, God knows what. And but being there with a camera, and I realized also it was very important that it be a camera, a photographic camera, not a video camera. That the fact that I was alone with the photographic camera, although everybody knows now that you can shoot video with a photographic camera, it did create something totally different. Otherwise, I felt that people maybe would think that I was shooting for TV or things like that. So, so it became almost like a public performance with my camera on the tripod and staying quite long. I would shoot like for 40 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, staying there, doing nothing and just capturing what was happening in front of the camera based on the implicit idea that if I shoot long enough, something important is going to happen. It didn't happen all the time, but quite a lot of the time it did happen in a very surprising way. So I started to accumulate material that had quite a strong character in terms of how time was passing, how suddenly something happens that start to change your optic, how you see the scene, the place, and then there's a whole system that did develop after the shooting that included quite elaborate digital manipulation of the images, especially in terms of recompositing them, especially dividing things and like doing a sort of a choreography with the elements I had captured, a visual choreography with the elements I had captured with the camera. And then I had the feeling that this did represent a way of condensing energy in the image, making it more dense. And then my view was that adding animation to that was getting this potential energy to explode, and from something that was how do you say that, where things are going inward to something that explodes, and where the meaning of the place explodes. So that was my idea, and I started to do so. Now I did 11 of those films. Some are very short, some are video installations, and some are features, some are medium length. So actually the last two were features. Actually the one I'm finishing now is a feature, and there was one done in France that was a feature also. So this, as you see, all came from the performances and did develop into this project. And the animation in this project, at first I had the idea that I had to use as little animation as possible to change the effect of the whole image.
Also during the performance?
No, that was during for the Places and Monuments project. Yeah. So I was trying to evaluate and to find the lower limit of animation in order that it continues to change everything in the film. So it was like a very minimalistic way of seeing animation. But slowly, I don't know why and how, I started to introduce those complex cycling effects that I had developed since Picasso. and that I developed even more with the digital setup of my performances, and to try. It was also a minimalistic outlook, because then I could think that if I do, in relation to a specific shooting, if I do very short loops of different length and that I overlap them, they would automatically produce combination of the two that would look always new material, that wouldn't repeat themselves, and where the loop feeling would disappear. So I started to, try to develop that, think what I should do in order to maximize this effect, and it became like in the last film, which is the Mount Fuji scene from a moving train. It's everything is done on that basis, actually.
But you had a
And
lot of drawing. I saw that you are producing a lot of drawings about from.
yeah, there's a section that is done with live action and drawings.
So it's
This is
not animation, it's drawing.
this film is a bit like an opera, where it has many different movement and aspects, and it has some very slow fluid sections, and other that are extremely intense and active. And yeah, it's a big composition with a lot of type of animation, of live action, of drawings, of different musics from many musicians I know. And yeah, so it's
Pierre, before we finish this speech with you, I would like you to talk a little bit about this project dedicated to John Cage, that is part of Places and Monuments.
yes.
And then that we explain us a little bit how is the process of developing another time your life with performance with scratching animation, because you have another part of scratching animation in the last years that you were developing, that blinkety blank
Yeah,
scratching.
yeah.
So this kind two things like this. First, these things about John Cage is very interesting.
Well, this. Well, I've always been interested in John Cage. Actually, one section of my very early film, uh, around perception, was actually a study of indeterminacy in terms that was directly inspired by John Cage. So he was always in the back of my mind. He was one strong influence, and it happened that when there was this, I think it was the 100th anniversary of John Cage, there were exhibition and things happening around in the world, and I was involved in an exhibition of drawing in Vienna, where I did create a number of drawings with the word silence in it, and they were part of that exhibition about John Cage, where they were all sort of different approach to create it by different artists to create a tribute to John Cage. And while doing that, one of the curator of this exhibition was associated with this project in Alberstadt that had been going on for a number of years, which consisted of playing one organ piece of John Cage, an organ piece that was called As Slow as Possible. And the only thing that was said to the performer, the organist that would play the piece, was to play it as slow as he could do it. And those people who wanted to create this homage to John Cage decided that they would design an organ that would play the piece automatically, not quite automatically actually, because they had to change pipes and things like that, over a period of 450 years. I don't remember the figure exactly, something of that sort.
They wanted to exaggerate.
So it was an extreme extension of time, of the time of the piece, beyond actually the actual possible time of the people who were creating it. So I thought that was very vertiginous, very interesting, and that it had to do with what I was trying to accomplish in the Places and Monument project. So I decided I would do one Places and Monument film with that, and I went in Alberstadt, and I actually shot the organ at a moment where they were changing the note, and this is how the film was created. So it made me more conscious of the fact that this whole series of Places and Monument had to do with time, with manipulation of time, concentration of time, extreme extension of time. So yeah, so that was a very important turning point.
So
And
this piece is now working by itself and like executing by itself in this church, and everybody who is living now in our planet won't be present at the end because it will be much longer. So,
yeah,
but in any case, if somebody's interested, I think there are some reference on the web. You can find reference where it is, this town in Germany, and how it works.
Germany, in Halberstadt, which is not too far, is sort of between Leipzig and Berlin, more or less.
I will go, and there will be also, I mean, a calendar with the changement of tune of note, because it will be like for some years will be the same note.
Oh yeah, when I shot actually, yeah, the year I shot, there was a bit more than a year before the following notes, and I did travel to Alberstadt for that change of note because they actually my film was shown in an exhibition that was in the exhibition room that is attending the church where this actually is not been used as a church for centuries, but it used to be a church when the organ is set up. And so that was like a year later, and that was a very important year because there was to be 7 years after that before a note would be changed where the same note was going to be played. So it was a major moment where thousands of people did actually gather to witness the change of notes. And I was asked actually to be one of the operative of changing the notes. And yeah, so I was very proud of doing that. And so yes, so that was very important. And of course, that made that John Cage remains a figure in the background of my work.
So
And the other question was, yeah,
scratching in the 2010 and whatever it
yeah,
is.
yeah. Well, you know this story because you were closely associated to it.
But it's
Yeah,
not me the interview.
and actually, it all came from a joke by Jean de Rome. You know, Jean de Rome was finally very important in my life because at one point he told me you should do the two things at the same time. I mean, the digital setup and the live scratch animation setup by running from one place to the other to animate the two places at the same time. And then we were supposed to perform in Meldula at Area Sismica. And then I think it was Johnny who wrote me an email and told me, I never saw you scratching on film. Could you do a little bit when you come? And I said, well, yes. So they had projectors and a projector, and then we did actually a complete performance that was to project from the digital setup and from the 16 millimeter projector by scratching directly live and running between the two things like Jean de Rome had suggested I should do. And so we had this performance that we did together that we eventually called Digital Scratch. And then I was asked by the the Center for Contemporary Art in Glasgow to do a performance in homage to Norman McLaren, at the moment of his 100th anniversary. So, so I suggested I would adapt digital Scratch to the theme of using images and ideas from Blinkety Blank. So this is how it
So you were
went.
back to your teenager time almost.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And we did this several times. Eventually, we did it in Montreal. And in Montreal, while we were doing it, I suddenly realized that I had found back my connection to Scratch animation. In the previous performance, I liked the texture it created between the digital stuff and the Scratch animation stuff. But I felt I was not very good at it because I had spent many years not doing it, so I lacked practice, and I wasn't too impressed with what I was doing with the Scratch animation. But in Montreal, suddenly I felt at ease, I had pleasure, and I liked what I was doing with the Scratch animation. And then that evening, actually, I decided that I would try to do Scratch animation again. And I did develop this whole project that lasted 2 3 years, where I went through doing little clips that I would post on Facebook that were done. Actually, the idea that struck me at that time was the idea of doing. I did a complete study of Blinkety Blank, taking notes of all the how the things were flickering, and I found out something that was much more complex than what I expected. And I got the idea of something that would be like polyphony of flickers, and try to develop that. So through those clips that I had posted on Facebook, a film I did from those clips, performance I did with two older Montreal musicians, Malcolm Goldstein and John Eward, and then when they did this performance, I had the idea that I should use two projectors and do it in the way I was overlapping loops in with digital tools. So having loops of two different lengths on the two projectors and having them running and scratching alternatively on the two projectors. But because one was lagging in relation to the other, it created ever new connections between the graphics that were one or the other loop of film. So it allowed to do something that was based on loops, but with loops conceived in a way that they would overlap one to the other, and create something that would develop in a half random way, but with certain control on what I should do in order. And so I started to. That was the beginning of a series of performance that was called Scratch, that I did with you and other musicians, and that I would like to do again if the situation allows for it, and because it.
Also in Cyprus.
Yes, we did it in Cyprus with some technical problems, uh, and that actually led to the fact that scratching directly on film had become very important again in my work, but associated in digital use of the scratch images actually, so that which allows to go into much more complex things. So, and actually, the result of this is the film I'm just finishing now. That is all that I could say that more than half of the film is a feature that most and maybe 2/3 of the film is scratch on film, and with live animation and yeah, with live action also. It has all the elements that did appear at one time or the other in my life. It's
This
the
was
absolute convergence point of my work.
2 hours long film, no?
Hey? It's a 1 hour and 20 minutes.
1 hour point. Okay. So I'm very curious because I saw something, but not the final editing of this film. So Pierre, I would say we didn't finish to talk about your work because I have in mind at least 3-4 other things to ask you, but I don't want to exaggerate. What I can say is that we can say ciao and try maybe to be together next year in ANIMAPHIX to play together and to
Yes, absolutely. I would be really happy.
So people can understand better how it works. And maybe next year we will see what will happen also with this COVID and whatever it
Yes, we don't know what to expect, but we can hope. And so, ciao.
So thank you, Per.
Grazie mille.
Ok, ciao.